Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podast Envy, episode 94. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and I'm serving up another podcast boss rant for you. I know, 2 in a row, but it's not just a rant. It's a rant about a rant, or many, many, many rants. I guess I'm a little worried about this one. Don't come at me. Okay, do come at me if you want. It's fine. And if you aren't big into the podcast industry news, maybe this one has totally escaped your social media bubble because, let's face it, you're busy running your business, creating your show. You don't have time for nonsense, and that's great. But I've gotten pulled in, and I have some observations to share only through the lens of what I think is interesting, relevant, and useful for you to consider in the larger scope of media, content, and influence. If you have been paying attention to all the shenanigans going on, then yes, you know that this is about Spotify and the great Joe Rogan debate. Wait, don't tune out yet. Here is my disclaimer. I personally do not care one way or another about Joe Rogan, his content, what he does or does not say, who his guests are or are not, nor what actions his fans decide to take as a result of what he says. I do not listen to the show, and listen, if you are someone who is likely to take medical advice or learn about science from a celebrity, whether it be Joe or Nicki Minaj or a former president of the United States, pauses to cover eyes with hand for a moment, then that is on you. I cannot solve your problems. If you don't know what I'm talking about yet, let me catch you up. The other day, someone who I don't know posted a question in a podcast group on Facebook, and I stupidly tried to answer from a neutral, helpful, informative place. She was asking why popular self-help author, speaker, and researcher Brené Brown had tweeted that she was going to stop producing new episodes of both of her Spotify exclusive podcasts until further notice. I replied that I suspected many folks with exclusive Spotify deals were going to be reevaluating their alignment with Spotify as a platform based on the controversy over Joe Rogan's anti-vax content. Okay, wait, that was me quoting from industry publication headlines and articles that I had actually read, not my own opinions, and not from me having listened to any of said content. I was simply trying to answer her question. Little did I know that I had invited hordes of Joe Rogan fans and legions of free speech defenders to yell at me in paragraph form about what he did or did not say, and censorship, and then I turned off notifications on that post. So yes, I had been following the story and reading the articles. And since, as I mentioned before, I don't care about Joe Rogan or his content, I wondered why I was so curious about what was unfolding. Okay, here is the quick summary that is totally paraphrased, and hopefully I don't get any of these details wrong. Throughout the pandemic, Joe Rogan, arguably the most famous and most downloaded podcaster of all time, who was paid like $100 million a while back to go exclusive on Spotify with his podcast, has had quote unquote controversial guests who have been deplatformed in other spaces who promote quote unquote conspiracy theories, anti-vax views, etc. Joe himself posted on social media that he got COVID and he recovered through the miracle of ivermectin treatment that many folks have been touting as a cure for COVID, but there doesn't really seem to be any scientific evidence to support that in the mainstream. However, it apparently worked for Joe, and he told all of his millions of followers and fans about it. None of this is news. But what is news is that the legendary musician Neil Young decided that enough was enough and to hold Spotify accountable for the spread of COVID misinformation. Wait, again, that's quote unquote COVID misinformation. I'm not calling it COVID misinformation because I don't know, because I didn't listen to it, because I don't want to listen to it, and I don't care, and I'm not interested. However, that's what Neil Young called it. So Neil Young was holding Spotify accountable by saying that he was going to pull his music off the streaming site if they didn't put a stop to it. I don't know exactly what his specific demands were, but something to that effect. Following that, Joni Mitchell joined in, and now Nils Lofgren, India Ari, Graham Nash. So why is any of this interesting to me, and what does it have to do with you? Here's a secret. I don't think any of this is actually about Joe Rogan. Not really. It's so much more complex and layered and nuanced than that. So I want to give you 5 more aspects to this conversation that I would like you to consider, if you're going to consider it at all. And there's probably even more than 5. This is just what I've been able to identify in the conversation over the last few days. Number 1, the jacked up nature of music streaming and how artists are treated in the music industry at large. Long before any of this went down, I've had conversations with friends who are independent musicians who struggle with the business model of streaming platforms, where they, as the artists creating the content, receive fractions of pennies for their music streams. Not sustainable. Also, though this action by Neil Young was ostensibly about Joe Rogan and his content, after the fact, when Spotify did not pull Joe's content down and Neil did ask to have his music removed and Spotify obliged, I also saw this weird, confusing letter from Neil. And I'll be 100% honest, because I do not wish to spread quote unquote misinformation. I can't truly verify the source, but the letter from Neil supposedly says, "When I left Spotify, I felt better. Digital music has been with us about 40 years now. Digital, rather than reproducing copies of music as we did back in the analog day, reconstitutes it from ones and zeros and plays back data that you hear as music. This allows business people like those who run Spotify to cut the quality right down to 5% of the music's content. It's just math. It's easy to do that with digital, thus allowing more songs and less music to stream faster." That's because 95% is missing. That's what Spotify, the tech company, does. Spotify then sells you the downgraded music. When I started, everyone got to hear all music, 100%. He goes on to mention other platforms like Amazon, Apple Music, and something I've never heard of that starts with a Q, deliver up to 100% of music today. That's what the whole lossless audio thing from Apple is supposed to be all about. But then at the bottom, he says, "I support free speech. I have never been in favor of censorship. Private companies have the right to choose what they profit from, just as I can choose not to have my music support a platform that disseminates harmful information. I am happy and proud to stand in solidarity with the frontline healthcare workers who risk their lives every day to help others. As an unexpected bonus, I sound better everywhere else." That's very confusing because you're making it about 2 separate things. Anyway, there was an article that I'm trying to find right now, and at the time that I'm recording this, I haven't found it. But if I do, I will link it in the show notes for you, along with these other gems that I have found. And that is that part of the point of this is that artists choosing to leave a behemoth platform like Spotify is proof that they are not beholden to the streaming companies. There was a whole thing with Taylor Swift when she pulled her music off of Spotify for a while until they quote unquote met her demands, whatever that was. So this isn't a new conversation, but it is a new log on the fire of this conversation about music streaming. Now, if Amazon and Apple and whatever that Q platform are provide a more lossless audio experience, that's one thing. Do they pay any better for the musicians? I really don't know. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, the future of content moderation and censorship. So whenever people are ranting and raving about censorship, content moderation and content choices are things that companies like Spotify or Facebook or Twitter can do. This is not me saying what is right and what is wrong and what should and should not be moderated and who should and should not do it. I am asking a question, which is, whose responsibility is it for checking and curating content? Like, this has been a debate going on for Facebook in terms of fake accounts spreading specific information or misinformation or distractions or whatever they were doing during previous US political elections. Content moderation comes into play in areas such as child pornography, gun violence, cult activity, religious fanaticism. There's so many different categories in which this is a huge question right now facing a lot of major tech platforms. To keep it more relevant to the topic at hand, in response to all of this hullabaloo, Daniel Ek from Spotify did post a public letter and did say that they did have a long-standing platform rules document about misinformation and that they are, quote, working to add a content advisory to any podcast episode that includes a discussion about COVID-19. This advisory will direct listeners to our dedicated COVID-19 hub, a resource that provides easy access to data-driven facts, up-to-date information as shared by scientists, physicians, academics, and public health authorities around the world, as well as links to trusted sources. This new effort to combat misinformation will roll out to countries around the world in the coming days. To our knowledge, this content advisory is the first of its kind by a major podcast platform. Now, any podcast episode that includes a discussion about COVID-19, well, there are millions of podcast episodes that are distributed on the Spotify platform. And Spotify doesn't actually know what content is in all of those podcast episodes. And there are many fewer podcast episodes labeled as Spotify exclusive content, including shows like The Joe Rogan Experience or like Brene Brown's two podcasts, Dare to Lead and Unlocking Us. So does that content advisory only go on the Spotify exclusive shows? Or somehow does that content advisory go on every single podcast that has anything to do with COVID-19, which would then automatically flag this episode somehow, if that was the case, which I don't think. Anyways, I don't know. I can't speculate on how that's going to turn out. But is Spotify responsible as a platform, as a company, for what I say on my podcast, which is not a Spotify exclusive, which they have not paid me to create, and they have not paid to have on their platform? I have put on their platform for free for more and more people to hear it, versus the responsibility that they have for Joe Rogan's content, which they have paid approximately $100 million for. So what is the responsibility of the company for content moderation? And what are the ripple effects that will happen in the industry at large from the choices that Spotify makes now? So that's number 2. And that leads right into number 3, which is, what kind of company is Spotify? I'm not talking about, are they a good witch or a bad witch? I'm talking about, are they a tech company or are they a content and media company? So this was something that was posed by an article in The Atlantic that clarifies that Spotify was never actually a music company, which is what some people would think of them as. They were always a tech company profiting off of music streaming, ad sales, memberships. And that part of the whole reason that they got into podcasting was because the music streaming wasn't all that profitable, and they saw a bigger opportunity with podcasting, especially as that all of the shows like mine are basically free content for Spotify, and they don't pay me a penny. They don't have to pay licensing or royalties or anything like that. And if Spotify has exclusive content that they are paying for, then does that shift their responsibility in terms of point number 2, which was about content moderation? Point number 4, I'd like you to consider, this conversation is exhausting me, y'all. I might need to take a break. This episode's podcast angel is Hello Audio, a delightful platform that I have just recently begun using that allows you to create private podcast feeds. I know, you have one show already. Like, do you really need to have multiple shows? But it allows you to create private podcast feeds that you can offer in a variety of different capacities. It could be for premium content for those super fans and listeners. It could be for delivering course content, or it could be free content that you use as an email list sign-up incentive. And there are so many more ways that you can use this platform. And I'd love to give you a sneak peek of what it's like. Right now, I am offering for free 5 questions you haven't asked about your podcast. And that is a secret 5-episode podcast feed that you can get the link for when you go to thecreativeimposter.com/5 questions. Drop your name and best email, and you will get an email with a link that takes you to a page where you can add that secret podcast to your favorite listening app, as long as it's not Spotify. Not because I'm taking a moral stance on this episode, but because it just doesn't play nicely with Spotify because of the way Spotify is configured. But you can listen to it in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, my favorite podcast app, Castro, etc. So once again, you can get the link to my free 5-episode secret podcast, 5 questions you haven't asked about your podcast at thecreativeimposter.com/5 questions linked for you in the show notes. And if you'd like to check out how Hello Audio can help you create that secret podcast content for your audience, go to thecreativeimposter.com/Hello Audio so they know I sent you. Both links are conveniently located for you in the show notes for this episode. Point number 4 that I would like you to consider is the power and responsibility of influencers in culture and society. And so yes, Joe Rogan has tons of followers. Joe Rogan is an influencer. Brene Brown has tons of followers. She is an influencer. Joe Rogan is not really a journalist. He's an entertainer. Never did the Joe Rogan Experience promise to provide fair and balanced reporting. So I personally think it's stupid when I read Joe's crappy apology. I should put apology in quotes. That says something like, if I've pissed you off, I'm sorry. I want to thank Spotify for being so supportive during this time. And I'm very sorry this is happening to them and that they're taking so much heat from it. And yes, it's not just heat, but they are losing stock value and money. And maybe that's just temporary. Who knows? But it does have real world financial consequences for the company. This apology just seems so dumb and forced. It's like taking a small child on the playground and forcing them to apologize to someone for something that they are clearly not sorry for. And it doesn't make the person they are apologizing to feel any better. It doesn't correct the wrong. It just makes everyone feel bad and awkward. And it's not true. And it's dumb. He's not a journalist. And speaking of being a journalist, this is a little bit of a sideways slant, but it did actually make me think of this episode that I was listening to of the Fantai podcast. Of course, I'll be linking to that as well. And it was called The Blogger Journalist Divide featuring Jasmine Simpkins. And it was about a totally separate incident, but the debate was about whether or not bloggers are beholden to the same journalistic integrity, such as fact-checking and having multiple sources before you report on something, whether or not bloggers should be beholden to those same journalistic standards. So that is worthwhile listening on this topic. But on the flip side of that, maybe no, maybe podcasters and bloggers are not beholden to the same standards as journalists. Fine. But my question is, what is the responsibility of an influencer? Is there a point at which you need to be held responsible for the content that you are sharing? And what is that point? Like, what are the lines that you can or can't cross? Is it just about the terms of service on the platforms in which your content appears? Is there a moral responsibility? And if so, did he cross any of those lines? Again, I can't really comment because, like I said, I didn't listen to the content. So it is not up to me to decide that. But the question is, as an influencer, as someone who wields power with their content choices, their guest choices, with their words, with their actions, with their social media posts, and it's not just him, believe me, there are influencers who have way more influence than he does in the world. What is your responsibility at that point, and what are the lines you can or cannot cross? All right, we're getting close to the end here. Point number 5, fifth and final point that I would like you to consider in this conversation: brand values and how to decide who to partner with. I think society is shifting to where brand values matter and are more visible than perhaps they have been in the past. It's no longer good enough to sit on the sidelines and just shrug. Everyone, influencers, celebrities, organizations, brands, businesses are being asked to take a position, to take a stand on the issues that are important to them and the issues that are important to their constituents, their followers, their clients, their customers, their fans, their listeners, what have you. So when Brene tweeted that vague tweet that someone had posted about in the podcasting group on Facebook that I stupidly responded to, she took a lot of heat for it. People were speculating. People were saying, oh, she doesn't really care. She's just trying to grab a piece of the spotlight and draw attention to herself. I'm sorry, sidebar. Isn't that what Twitter is? Isn't that basically the only reason to tweet, to get attention? Okay, sidebar over. She didn't say specifically that it was about Joe. She didn't say that it was him or her. She didn't say that she was pulling her shows off of Spotify forever. She didn't say any of that. When I saw it, here's where my mind immediately went. I'm a fan of Brene. I don't listen to her podcasts anymore, not because of some moral stance necessarily about Spotify, just I don't enjoy listening to podcasts on Spotify. I prefer other apps. And so when she took her shows exclusive with Spotify, I just stopped listening. However, I am a fan of her work. And as soon as I saw it, I said, oh, that makes sense. She is seeing the doo-doo hit the fan, and she is pausing to take a moment to consider what to do, because that is her brand, is to be mindful, to be thoughtful, to be responsive. So I imagined immediately that's what she was doing, is she was taking a pause to assess the situation, gather more information. She is a researcher after all, and figure out what to do. And so today, on the day that I'm recording this, she posted on Facebook the following. It's a little bit long, so bear with me. We often joke about Unlocking Us and Dare to Leave being pausecasts, not podcasts. I have a habit of taking long pauses to think about a question or an answer. Last week, I took a bigger pause, and I'd like to walk you through it. On Saturday, January 29, I posted across social media that I would not be releasing any podcasts until further notice. I'd had hundreds of comments across social media asking my opinion on the Spotify Joe Rogan issue, and I didn't know enough to comment. Aside from Andrea. Of course she didn't. She's super busy. Why would she? Anyway, I didn't want to drop new podcasts without responding to the question, so I decided to hold my podcasts and learn more. Because I had a podcast scheduled to release at 12:01 a.m. on January 31st and another on February 2, I thought it was important for weekly listeners to know that nothing would drop this week. I paused because as a creator with 2 podcasts exclusively on Spotify, I wanted to better understand the organization's misinformation policy. I wanted to talk to the Spotify leadership about their position, their policies, and the application of those policies. I met with them twice last week and once again this week. I've listened, they've listened, and my assessment is that everyone is open and learning, including me. Sadly, on social media, my post has turned into this next one I'm going to have to modify a bit because I like to keep a clean rating on Podast Envy. Sadly, on social media, my post has turned into a doo-doo show driven by unfounded accusations of censorship. Comments like, quote, I'm canceling you for canceling people, and, quote, I hate censors, so you shut up, and, quote, I'm burning your books because I don't agree with you, end quote. Would be ironic and funny if they didn't demonstrate a complete lack of critical thinking. For everyone who has said this pause was out of line with my work, you clearly skipped all the places where I've talked about pausing, getting curious, and asking questions. Let me be clear. 1, I'm not interested in canceling or silencing or censoring anyone, including Joe Rogan. This was not, nor has it ever been, framed to the public or to Spotify as me or Joe. Hard stop. 2, I do not support censorship. I have a long history of supporting free speech and supporting organizations that protect free speech. My support for the First Amendment has been unwavering, even when what is being said turns my stomach. Some of my hardest moments as a social worker were defending the rights of people to speak their minds, even though I disagreed with every single word coming out of their mouths. 3, as a creator on Spotify, my ask has been very straightforward since the beginning. I'd like Spotify to have a transparent misinformation policy made available to the public that balances addressing the complex misinformation issues we face today while respecting free speech. And to be meaningful, this policy must be applied across the platform without exception. 4, personally, I would never want to silence debate about vaccine safety and efficacy because the lack of critical discussion actually increases vaccine hesitancy. However, rigorous debate that benefits the public does not include the dissemination of misinformation. 5, Both censorship and misinformation are threats to public health and democracy. Rather than falling prey to believing that we have to tolerate one to protect against the other, our collective well-being is best served when we approach debates and discourse with curiosity, critical thinking, and a healthy skepticism of false dichotomies. I've enjoyed the creative collaboration with Spotify, and I appreciate how the leadership has shown up in our meetings over the past week. Now that Spotify has published its misinformation policy, and the policy itself appears to address the majority of my concerns, I'm in the process of learning how the policy will be applied. I'm hopeful that the podcasts will be back next week. No matter what I say or do, some of you will be frustrated, disappointed, or pissed off. That's okay. I will never stop sharing my opinions and beliefs to make anyone feel better or more comfortable or to gain your approval. Not now, not ever. For those of you who expressed concern about censorship and misinformation issues, asked for more information, and engaged in real dialogue, thanks. I appreciate the conversation. Stay awkward, brave, and kind, Brene. Now, I am not saying that Brene Brown is perfect. I am not saying that her response is perfect. What I am saying is that Brene is very certain and clear about her brand. And this is exactly the measured, careful, thoughtfully worded response that I would expect from her. And that is not the type of response that you can just whip out at a moment's notice because people are demanding some kind of response from you on a topic that you don't have enough information about. And yes, as someone with a brand, a recognizable and influential brand, it matters who you align that carefully crafted brand with as a strategic partner. Now, does that mean that you as a podcaster should pull your show off of Spotify if you are in disagreement about their current policies or about their content or about Joe Rogan or whatever? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, my show is still there. I haven't pulled it. I think that there is actually a difference between whether a show is independent and distributed everywhere, including Spotify, versus a brand like Brene, who is exclusive to Spotify, which is more like aligning your brand with theirs. I could be totally wrong about that, and you may have a different opinion, and you are entitled to that opinion if you wish. So I don't have a lot of answers for you, but before you go jump to the conclusion that this is a conversation about censorship, free speech, vaccines, or God forbid, even Joe Rogan himself, use those super sharp critical thinking skills that I know you have to uncover what this is really about and where you stand on these questions as aligns with your values. You may not have as many fans and followers as Joe or Neil or Brene, but you are a podcaster, you are a content creator, and you have people who listen to what you say. Your voice matters, your values matter, your words have power. Use that power wisely. And I know it's not you doing this, so please tell your friends to stop picking stupid fights on social media. Podast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.